Hi, my name is Walter Beals, and I am a member of the Board of Directors of Historic Boydton Renaissance, or HBR. It's an organization that was formed by local citizens about 20 years ago to spearhead the revitalization of the core of Mecklenburg County's capital, and since then has continued to produce events and functions and other projects that would enhance the attractiveness and the utility of the Boydton and Mecklenburg County area. We would welcome your inquiries and interest in HBR. It's purely voluntary and it is to assist all of us. A little bit of background about Boydton. When Mecklenburg County was separated from Lunenburg in 1765, this site was chosen for the capital and the seat of government because it was at the center of the county and it was adjusted. The courthouse location was adjusted to be 1 mile south of the exact center as a concession to the inhabitants located south of the Roanoke River. A courthouse, a jail, and stocks were built, and much of the land in the area around the courthouse and the Boydton area was owned by Richard Swepson, whose daughter Anne married Alexander Boyd Sr., a Scottish immigrant. Their son, Alexander Boyd Jr., inherited much of the land and had it laid off into lots with a square at the center for the courthouse. In 1812, the legislature incorporated the town on the eve of the war with Great Britain, and with the patriotic fervor of the time, they decided to name the main street Washington and the two leading secondary streets for the other Virginians who were our nation's chief executives, Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, and also another street for the soon-to-be president, another Virginian, James Monroe. The remaining streets in the original part of the town were named for the naval heroes of the day, Stephen Decatur, John Paul Jones, and Isaac Hull. In 1830, the Methodists of Virginia and North Carolina established Randolph-Macon College here, which operated 36 years until economic fallout from the Civil War caused it to relocate in Ashland. Then, in the late 1940s and early 1950s, the federal government built Carr Dam for flood control, power generation, and water recreation on the Roanoke River 10 miles southeast of Boydton. And in 2010, Microsoft Corporation announced the location of its large East Coast cloud data center here, which has since become one of the world's largest such facilities. In the 1820s, this region was a big horse breeding and horse racing country with famous horses and a large track which existed on the later Randolph-Macon site. To honor this legacy, the horseshoes in the sidewalks marking much of our walking tour exist. Let's begin our tour with the horseshoe at 461 Madison Street, which is Boydton's Town Hall and Municipal Building, since 1905. The first floor, up through the mid-1950s, also housed the town's post office. The second floor, for many years, was used as an auditorium where high school plays and graduations were held, traveling entertainers performed, and political rallies were staged. The building was constructed with revenue generated by liquor sales from the town-owned dispensary, which was located next door. The Boydton Model Train Club now occupies the second floor space. At the intersection of Madison and Washington Streets, follow the horseshoes and turn left to Boyd Tavern. The central section of this building is the oldest structure in the town of Boydton and was built on a much smaller scale originally by Alexander Boyd Sr. in the 1790s. It is on the Virginia and National Registers. The basement of the original part of the tavern includes a 2-cell jail, which is quite interesting. Numerous special events are held here during the year, and the tavern is often rented for private functions. The tavern was operated in the 1820s and 1830s by Colonel William Towns, who married into the Boyd family, who owned the racetrack and was a major supporter of Randolph-Macon here. Colonel George Rogers acquired the tavern in the mid-1840s and operated it through the mid-1850s. He was also on the Board of Trustees of Randolph-Macon. Now, looking straight ahead on North Washington Street is a little hill, and down at the bottom of that hill is the trailhead for the Rails to Trails that we have in the town and just outside of town, which so far goes about 1 mile and is located on the former Atlantic and Danville Railway right-of-way. Turning to your right onto Hull Street, by crossing Washington Street, you'll see a horseshoe on the sidewalk. And across the street from that horseshoe, you will see a small graveyard which contains the grave of Alexander Boyd Sr. and several members of his family. Continuing along Hull Street, crossing over to the south side of Hull Street at the intersection with Jones Street, continue on Hull Street following the several horseshoes in the sidewalk. On the right, situated on a hill, is the Boydton Presbyterian Meeting House, which was built in 1820 on land given by Alexander Boyd Jr. This is Boydton's oldest church. It is no longer in use as a church and is owned by the town. The rear 2 rows of pew seats in the church have knife hack marks on the rounds of the seats. Legend says they were made by Randolph-Macon students. Across the street is a replica of the Boydton-Petersburg Plank Road, showing the construction techniques that were utilized to build it, and also a tobacco hogshead on a wagon, a chief product that was carried on the Plank Road from Boydton to Petersburg, where it could be loaded onto ships at the Appomattox River. The Roanoke River being south of Boydton being mostly non-navigable to the sea. Just beyond the Plank Road replica is intersection with Cemetery Street. So walk along Cemetery Street and you will see the Presbyterian Cemetery on the right, which is the town's oldest cemetery. It contains the graves of many prominent early citizens of the town of Boydton. The Baptist Church Cemetery is on your left. That's a newer cemetery. At the end of Cemetery Street, you will be on Madison Street, US 58 Business, and you'll want to walk to the right, past Dollar General, and on your left will be the intersection with Jones Street. You'll want to cross over Madison Street and walk along Jones Street, and you'll immediately see on your left St. James Episcopal Church and the adjacent cemetery. When Lunenburg County was partitioned in 1765, 2 counties were created from that. Charlotte County, which followed the boundaries of Cumberland Parish, and Mecklenburg County, which followed the boundaries of St. James Parish. Remember, this is still during colonial times, and the Episcopal Church was the state church of Virginia. The cemetery at St. James Episcopal Church is very interesting. It contains the graves of many prominent political public officials in this county over the years, and a lot of the early family patriarchs and merchants and prominent citizens. The St. James Episcopal Church Sanctuary was built between 1840 and 1841. It is the second oldest church in Boydton. It was erected on land donated by Beverly Sidner, a prominent merchant here of the time, and is the third location of the St. James Parish. The contractor was James Whittis, who was one of the contractors who worked on the Randolph-Macon project and one of the co-builders of the circuit courthouse here. This church has had several very prominent rectors who have gone on to become bishops in their various jurisdictions. One of the earliest rectors was the Reverend John Stark Ravenscroft, who became the first Episcopal bishop of North Carolina. the prominent Ravenscroft School in Raleigh is named for him. Another rector was Beverly D. Tucker, who became Bishop of Ohio, and in the 1950s, A. Heath Light was the rector here, and he later became Bishop of the Western Diocese of Virginia. This handsome Greek Revival building is not being used as a church at this time, but is under private ownership and being used for private functions and various cultural and entertainment events. When you leave the churchyard, go right on Jefferson Street and walk to the top of the hill, and you will be at the intersection with Washington Street. Crossing over Jefferson Street, you'll be on the corner, the southeast corner, and the handsome white brick building immediately in front of you is the Mecklenburg County Administration Office, built as the Williams and Goode Bank in about 1899 on the site of the former Exchange Hotel. Now, during the Randolph-Macon era here in Boydton from 1832 to 1868, there were a lot of visitors connected with the college operations, among other things such as court work, and it took 2 hotels to handle all of these people. And in addition to the Boyd Tavern, there was the Exchange. And the Exchange existed on this site till about 1899, when it was destroyed by fire. Just beyond the Exchange Hotel on the same side of the street, you will see the modified Georgian architecture of a red brick 1.5-story building. This building was built as the original Mecklenburg County Public Library, and the building, along with an initial inventory of books, was donated anonymously at the time. Later became known that the donor was David K.E. Bruce, who also gave libraries for about 6 or 8 other rural counties in Virginia. Ambassador Bruce was the only person in the history of the United States to serve as ambassador to France, Germany, and Great Britain in one lifetime. Going back to the corner of Jefferson and Washington Streets, the building immediately in front of you to the left is the present library. It's built on the site of the original Bruce and Sydney Mercantile establishment, and on Alexander Boyd Jr.'s plat of the town of Boydton, that is lot number 1. Behind the brick Bruce and Sydney building, which no longer exists, that was on this site, is the little frame Washington Tavern, which we will talk about in a moment, that has since been relocated from the original site. Looking to your right, you will see the Courthouse Square, with a large and very beautiful central section, the original part of the courthouse, built as the circuit courthouse for Mecklenburg County between 1838 and 1842 by William Howard, one of the 2 principal co-contractors of the Randolph-Macon buildings, and James Whittis, whom we've just mentioned, who was also working with the Randolph-Macon project and later built the St. James building. The clerk's office, the wing to the right, no longer used as a clerk's office, but built as such around 1907, is presently houses the Commonwealth Attorney's Office, and the south wing was completed along with the total renovation of the building around 2010 or 11 to add a second courtroom. Continuing westerly on Jefferson Street, the next building past the county library is the 2-story brick building, which is very old and has a very interesting history. It was thought to have been built perhaps by Bruce and Sydney when they built the main mercantile establishment store 2 lots away on the corner that we just spoke of. But during much of the 1800s, it was operated by the Duggars father and son who were tailors. And at one time in the early 1950s, the establishment was known as Duggar and Gary's Tailor Shop. When the Randolph-Macon students need clothes made, or when they needed clothes alterations or mending done, this was where they went. And we have the diary of a young man who was a student here in college in the early 1850s, and he has an entry saying that he had gone to Duggar and Gary's earlier that day to be measured for a pair of trousers to replace the pair in his dormitory room that had been chewed by the rats. This building, during much of the 1900s, was used for law offices. Sterling Hutchison, later federal judge in the Eastern District of Virginia, and his brother John Y. Hutchison had their law firm on the first floor. And at one time, Charles T. Ricks, prominent lawyer here for many years, and his son-in-law Frank Bettinger Sr. had their law offices on the second floor. The building has had a number of uses over the years and has some very unusual four square windows if you would look closely at the windows on the side. Adjacent to this building is a little one-story brick building which has been used for most of its life at this location as a law office for various lawyers. Interestingly, it was made and constructed from materials taken from the Western Dormitory building at Randolph-Macon, which was raised by Colonel Thomas F. Good, who needed a law office near the courthouse after he had bought part of the Randolph-Macon land. And this building, since Colonel Good's death, has been used by various lawyers, including later Circuit Court Judge William E. Holmes. Turn left at this point and you'll be on Bank Street, and across the street you'll be looking at the Boydton Methodist Church complex. The prayer garden on the corner was built on the site of the former Gregory Motor Company, a long time DeSoto Plymouth Chrysler Corporation dealer here in town. And after it closed, the church acquired the property and has converted the site into a prayer garden. Adjacent to the prayer garden is a little small one-story frame building. This is the Washington Tavern that we spoke about earlier. It's one of the oldest buildings in Boydton, built on or shortly after 1822 by Bruce and Sidner as part of their mercantile establishment. The sign in front of the building tells you a little of the history of it. James Bruce from Halifax County, when he died in the mid-1830s, was reputedly the third wealthiest man in America. And his other claim to fame was that he was America's first chain store owner. He had a series of about 9 retail establishments throughout Southern Virginia, in partnership with minority owners who were the managers of his stores and were also his bankers, because he made loans to people in exchange for the interest income that he would get from them, and his store owner was also his loan officer. The building is presently being used, since it's been moved from the Washington Street location over to the Methodist Church property in the 1970s, as the parish house of the Methodist Church. And the main church sanctuary, as you will see, is a very handsome, stately, tall brick facility with a tall steeple, and is one of only 2 churches that was designed and built by Jacob Holt, prominent builder and designer in Warrenton, North Carolina, prior to the Civil War, and then after the fallout from the war, moved to Mecklenburg County, where he continued building various structures, including the wings on the Boyd Tavern and this church building. The other interesting thing to note about the church building historically is its steeple contains the original Randolph-Macon College bell, which was given to the local sanctuary by the College Board of Trustees when the college moved to Ashland, knowing that the the local congregation of Methodists would need to build a sanctuary to replace the college chapel where they had been worshiping for 36 years. The third building in the Methodist Church complex is the multi-purpose building on the left side of the sanctuary, which includes a sizable fellowship hall that was built in 2010. So, in connection with the college bell that I just mentioned, you would want to know that this congregation is the original campus church of Randolph-Macon College, just as Duncan Memorial Methodist in Ashland is today. Now, returning to the corner of Jefferson and Bank Streets, we will walk west on Jefferson Street past the Prayer Garden, and you will see a brick one-story office building that was constructed in 3 sections. If you look closely, you can see the division between the sections. For a number of years, it housed the medical office of Dr. William Shelton, long time and much beloved family practitioner here. Prior to that, the county school board had its headquarters in the building. The oldest of the 3 sections is the westernmost section, and that was built shortly after the turn of the century in the early 1900s for the Boydton Mutual Aid Society. Boydton Mutual Aid Society was one of a number of such fraternal benefit organizations that were very active at being founded and operated by the African American community in the United States during the early 1900s. This particular society was headed by J.W. Joe Williams. Almeda Burrell, whose little store building is across the street from this site and has a horseshoe in the sidewalk in front of it, and along with her husband Henry Burrell, and possibly Leander Reed, who was a prominent African American political figure here during Reconstruction, were also involved in this organization. Almeda Burrell's store is now the office of Crowder Driver Improvement Programs. Now let's backtrack to the corner of Jefferson and Bank Streets. And going northerly on Bank Street, the little frame building on the left was the longtime law office of Mr. E.C. Good, also better known as Eddie Good, longtime attorney here, son of Colonel Thomas F. Good. His father was a prominent attorney, and Mr. Good was Commonwealth's attorney of this county on 2 different occasions. He was a very colorful and superb trial lawyer from all of the comments that I've ever heard about him. The First Citizens Bank building just beyond the Good office building is in the former Farmers Bank of Boydton building. Farmers Bank of Boydton was organized in 1918 as an alternative to the privately owned proprietary Williams and Good Bankers financial house, and existed until 1956 in the old Bank of Mecklenburg building, which is now the right half of the present bank building. The bank building was doubled in size onto a vacant lot that the bank had long owned to give much more space in the mid-1950s. In the early 1920s, this block north of the brick bank building was destroyed by fire. The 3 buildings that now exist, all brick, north of the Rose's Pizza building, and a 4th building which was raised by the Highway Department for widening Madison Street into U.S. Highway 58 in 1941, were constructed by Joe Williams. I just mentioned him as being the driving force between the Boydton Mutual Aid Society. Joe Williams came into this county in the 1890s and built a large home in the vicinity of the old Randolph-Macon College campus, which was then the Boydton Institute. a school operated by Boston, Massachusetts-based religious people for educating the freed slaves and their children. Joe Williams' lifetime employment was in the hospitality industry, and he worked for many years as a steward on large ocean-going passenger liners and also in big resort hotels. Consequently, he didn't have much overhead. He slept in the places where he was employed, and he ate the food that was provided in those places. And of course, we didn't have a national income tax at all until 1913. So Joe Williams, being a frugal person, saved his money, brought it back here, and invested in land. And not only did he own about half of the block on Bank Street, but he owned that whole block between Bank Street on Jefferson Street, between Bank Street and Monroe Street, and 2 lots beyond Monroe Street on Jefferson Street. Crossing Madison Street, straight ahead, you will see the one-story former Esso gas station that was built in 1942 by William Crutchfield, a well-known African-American area merchant and farmer, and his wife Edna. This building is now owned by their daughter, Barbara Crutchfield George, an attorney and former college professor in California who was once the subject of a feature story and cover in Ebony magazine. So as you can see, now that we've completed our downtown tour of Boydton, because we're right back at the town hall now where we started, this town has had some interesting connections and personalities involved over the years. I'd like to mention just a couple or 3 of them for your interest. I've already alluded to Colonel Thomas F. Good. Colonel Thomas F. Good, as his name implies, was a colonel in the Confederate Army, headed the Boydton Cavalry unit that left here at the beginning of the war. He was wounded in the war and came back here, and from the ruins of the Civil War and the economy that was present here, rebuilt his family's economic situation, and through the kindness of other people, because everyone always said he was a perfect gentleman, treated everyone well with respect, regardless of color or sex, and had a lot of friends. Some of his friends told him about a spring west of Clarksville that was had healing qualities in it, that old folks used to go to, that would cure a lot of ailments that they had. And this was the beginning of the famous Buffalo Lithia Springs, which Colonel Good made into a prominent regional resort, and from which source a lot of his wealth derived by bottling of water from the famous spring number 2 that contained lithium in it and shipping it all over the world. His father, interestingly enough, Dr. Samuel Good, was one of the early owners of the homestead at Hot Springs and really brought it into the early prominence from just being a little local, small spa. A final person that comes to mind is Elizabeth Keckley. Some of you who follow public television from time to time may have seen the story of Elizabeth Keckley that PBS North Carolina produced some years ago. Elizabeth Keckley was born a slave in Petersburg and eventually ended up here working for the Hugh Garland family. Hugh Garland was the brother of Landon Garland, the second president of Randolph-Macon here. And Mrs. Garland operated the Boydton Academy, which was very well received and thought of local private school for young women. Elizabeth Keckley found the work there to be quite arduous, with all of these young girls to look after and pick up after or whatever. And so she just asked if she could be transferred over to Mrs. Garland's sister, who lived in Hillsborough, North Carolina, who ran a similar school over there. When she got to Hillsborough, she found out the situation was just as difficult over there as it was over here, so she asked to come back to Virginia, which she did. Hugh Garland did not receive the appointment or election to succeed his brother as president of Randolph-Macon, so he and his family left Boydton and moved to St. Louis. And, of course, Elizabeth Keckley went with them. By then, she had developed skills as an outstanding milliner or seamstress, and she was allowed to keep the money that she earned from that during her own time of not working for the Garland family. Eventually, she bought her freedom from Hugh Garland, paid off her wealthy clients in St. Louis who had loaned her money, and moved her operation to Washington, where she soon built up a large trade. One of her customers ended up being Mary Todd Lincoln, the First Lady of the land. And when Elizabeth Keckley wrote her memoirs many years later, the title of her autobiography was From the Slave House to the White House. I've enjoyed presenting this little vignette of Boydton to you. I hope you enjoy it, and any questions that any of you may have about Boydton, we certainly welcome your inquiries. The town hall with the municipal building staff would be a good contact point for any of you that would like to follow up with us, and we would look forward to hopefully meeting you and maybe persuading you that Boydton is not only the capital of the county, but it's a capital place to live. Thank you.